South Korea is mourning the victims of its worst air crash. 179 people were killed when the Boeing 737-800 came down at Muan Airport and burst into flames. Only 2 people survived. Authorities are investigating.
Paying their respects to the victims of Sunday's disaster. This memorial close to the site of the crash in the city of Muan is already piled with white chrysanthemums left by mourners. South Korea's acting president Choi San-mok joined those laying flowers as he promised support for bereaved families. 179 people died after the Jeju airplane skidded down the runway at speed at Muan Airport before crashing into a wall and bursting into flames. At the airport, grieving and angry relatives have been waiting for answers and their loved ones' remains. But identifying the dead looks set to be a lengthy process.
The bodies are so severely damaged that we are in a situation where we need to recover and piece them together one by one. That's the current reality. So we have requested more medical personnel and resources to be deployed to help with this.
Just 2 people survived the crash. Both crew members pulled from the plane's tail, the only part of the Boeing 737-800 aircraft left recognizable. Emergency workers are still combing through the wreckage. Both the plane's flight recorders have already been recovered, but officials say it could take months to complete their investigation into the cause of the crash. Investigators are looking into why the plane couldn't deploy its landing gear, as well as whether it was hit by birds. The government has also ordered a comprehensive inspection of every 737-800 in the country as it searches for answers to the worst ever air crash on South Korean soil.
Let's get more now on this from aviation journalist Andreas Späth. He joins us from Hamburg. Andreas, thanks for being with us. Some aviation experts are saying a bird strike alone would not have caused such a disaster like this at Muan Airport. What's your take?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Air crashes like these are always kind of a massive amount of factors working together in a bad way. And there's always a chain of events that in the end leads to a catastrophe. So a bird strike alone normally doesn't bring out an aircraft out of the sky. And I've talked to a pilot this morning who even flew in Korea, the 737-800 himself for a decade. And he said he had 2 bird strikes in Korea and not even the engines failed afterwards. So it's definitely not something that makes a plane doomed if a bird strike hits, which apparently is quite common in Korea. So we see other factors here, and as mentioned just in the film we just saw, one important question is why wasn't the gear extended? Why did the aircraft land on the aircraft so short to the end of the runway, so they only touched ground like about at the half length of the runway was always already behind them, so they kind of didn't have the full runway to use for them. And of course, the last question is really valid. Why in the world was there a big concrete wall only 300 meters after the end of the runway?
Now, South Korea has ordered a comprehensive inspection of all the country's aircraft similar to the model that crashed. That means the entire Boeing 737-800 fleet. What are they looking for?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I actually doubt that will lead to anything because the 737-800, much different to the much maligned 737 MAX, which is the newer generation, the 800 is like a real workhorse, a real backbone of the Boeing narrow-body fleet and has been like this for like over a decade. So this is a really mature aircraft. And if there would have been some flaw with the aircraft itself, then it would have shown long time ago. You have to keep in mind that the original 737 concepts concept first flew in 1968. So that's over 50 years ago. So that's really, really a long time. So this aircraft is really mature. So I think what's rather important here is to look at crew action and the coordination of the crew. And the pilot I talked to this morning, he told me on the 737, pilots get trained to get an emergency landing configuration, and this could be done within 20 seconds. They had 3 minutes of time, which is not a lot, of course, under this extreme pressure they were facing. But still, I think looking at crew action might yield more close to what caused this crash than the expectation that anything would be wrong with the 737-800.
So pilot error is definitely a theory that's being pursued in the investigation. But Boeing planes have been in the news in recent years for multiple failures, not necessarily with this particular model. But in your opinion, how likely is it that a fault in the aircraft is behind this crash?
That's extremely unlikely. I mean, I think it's a given already for all of us after we've seen even videos of this compressor stall happening on final approach yesterday in the Korean airport, that there was bird strike happening. It's not clear how many birds were striking the aircraft, but at least one is on video already. So that was starting the chain of events. And so that's very obvious. That's basically fate and has nothing whatsoever to do with the aircraft itself. Yes, Boeing still has huge problems. Main factor in the narrow-body fleet was as I called before, the 737 MAX, which is still not totally ironed out, especially in production and production quality. But otherwise, this is nothing really that can be related to this aircraft type.
Andreas, thank you very much for talking with us. That was aviation journalist Andreas Späth.
So there are many open questions surrounding this plane crash. Let's take a look at a couple of them with aviation security analyst Julian Bray. Welcome. Before this crash, the plane had already made an unsuccessful attempt to land. Do we know why that was?
Yes, we are. Good evening. We understand there was a bird strike, quite a massive bird strike. It's been described as a wall of birds. So there's no way that the pilot could possibly fly around or go around or get away from the birds. It was too late.
And what is the procedure that pilots should follow if they are to hit so many birds at one time?
Well, first of all, it depends how you're compromised. If say, the birds are ingested into one engine, then the problem is with that engine, and you still have a good engine. So it should mean that the aircraft can fly, although it can't fly at its normal speed, and it will have the compromise, and the pilot will have to make alternative arrangements to make sure that the flight is level. But it's not an impossible ask to actually fly the plane with one engine out. Now, that's what they're advised to do. However, if both engines are compromised, then he has a real problem.
Even if you'd reached a point where birds had hit both engines, would that be enough to bring the plane to a point where nothing works, no landing flaps, an inability to put down the landing gear?
Well, let's say it actually, the birds actually ingested in one engine, because we understand it's one engine that was really at fault. It could well be that the turbofans shot off and possibly punctured the wall, the cowling of the engine, and possibly cut the hydraulics. Or it could be that it's cut the electricity, the generator that supplies the power to the hydraulic lines. So that is a possibility. If he's lost power, then he has a problem. There are reserve backup systems that he can deploy, but all this was happening very, very quickly because he's in the course of going round again to try and land again. So we have to be very careful how we look at this. A lot of questions there to be answered.
And how much of a role would the pilot's reaction play here in such a stressful situation? Is it possible that they could have simply pressed the wrong buttons in such a moment?
There is a spear of thought that possibly he might have actually turned off the wrong engine and turned off the good engine, and so he'd be left with no engines at all. So that is only one theory. It is quite possible. We also have to establish whether there are two pilots on board or single manning. His real problem, of course, is getting the undercarriage down, and from what we can see of the videos, that didn't happen.
Yes, turning back to the landing gear, does a bird strike seem like the most likely possibility to you when you look at that, or are there other things that could have caused this failure?
There are other things. In fact, again, if the hydraulics were actually damaged, then that would stop the wheels from going down. However, if he had longer and he had full electricity, full power, he would need quite a few minutes to go through the alternative procedures. Every Boeing aircraft has several different systems to do the same function. It's called redundancy. So they could actually put the emergency systems into place. But really, I don't think he had time to do that. I'm saying he, she, they. So the whole point is that he would have to land, do a belly landing with the wheels very firmly up.
And just turning briefly to the Boeing 737-800 itself, South Korea has now ordered an investigation into all of those planes. Boeing, of course, has been contending with many problems this year. Do you think a fault in the aircraft could have been one of the reasons here too? And if not, why are we seeing this investigation of all aircraft of this type?
Well, this is something the president said should take place. And in fact, it's already happening, because whenever there's something like this, there's an automatic international investigation. And I understand that representatives from Boeing and from the American aviation authorities are already on scene and assisting. There will be a detailed, minute examination of the wreckage. It will be reconstructed in a warehouse to try and find out what happened and what the causes were. And of course, they have already recovered the two black boxes. This is the voice data recorder and the data recorder and the voice recorder. So they can put those together and they will have a complete picture of what was happening in that aircraft during the previous hour, right up to the point of impact.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you so much for joining us today with your insights. That is aviation security analyst Julian Bray.
Thank you.